Good day, everyone. Greg Satilla here from CRPG Legends, but you might know me as Gore from Q-Choose on WoW Classic's Mancrick server. And today I'm here to talk about the world buff meta in World of Warcraft Classic and how players put themselves into buff jail on a weekly basis in order to push progression and performance. The fact that players organize and schedule the drops of world buffs daily across servers in World of Warcraft is both a giant nuisance and a huge community achievement at the same time. To understand the buff meta in World of Warcraft, I think it's important to understand how much power that stacking these buffs add to your character. There are currently 7 main world buffs that players can attain on any given day, and an 8th that is available once a month for a period of a week. These buffs have set durations of 1 or 2 hours, and they will be lost on death. They can also be dispelled by enemy players. Now, I play on a PvE server, so I have never had to worry about my buffs being dispelled or getting ganked on my way to raid, but I can only imagine how awful that feeling must be, as this happens consistently to players on PvP servers. Let's start with the Diremault tribute buffs. Inside Diremault, there are 3 buffs you can get from doing what is called a tribute run, where you go in and you leave 3 of the ogre guards alive as you complete the instance through various means, finishing by becoming the new king of the ogres. Once you are the king, the guards you did not kill will each give you a unique 2-hour buff. These buffs are Slipkick Savvy, which will increase your chance to crit with a spell by 3%, Fangus's Ferocity, which is a big boy for the melee class, and that's a 200 attack power buff, and finally Moldar's Moxie, which is a 15% stamina buff, which is great for everyone as survivability is always key. You can get these buffs whenever you do a tribute run or go into an instance that has completed a tribute run. So cleared tribute run instances are sold every day by groups or classes that can solo it themselves. The next set of buffs can only be given out once per character on your server. They are the quest rewards for turning in the Rend, Ani, and Nef's Head, and the Heart of Hakar. These will give you the following buffs. Warchiefs Blessing is given to the Horde side players by turning in the head of Rend Blackhand and can be received in both Orgrimmar and the Crossroads. This buff gives you 300 hit points, 15% haste to melee, and 10 mana regen every 5 seconds for 1 hour. This is a great buff to have for nearly every class no matter what level, but especially for melee where the haste helps significantly. This buff can also be received by alliance players if under mind control when the buff goes out. This buff has a 3-hour cooldown before it can be given out again. Rallying Cry of the Dragon Slayer is given out for turning in the heads of Onyxia or Nefarian and is received in Orgrimmar and Stormwind, and increases crit chance of spells by 10%, melee and ranged crit chance by 5%, and gives 140 attack power as well for 2 hours. Each of these heads has their own unique 6-hour cooldown before the buff can be given again. The Spirit of Zandalar is given out after turning in the Heart of Hakar and can be received in both Booty Bay or Yojimba Isle, and it gives a 10% movement speed increase and all stats are increased by 15% for 2 hours. This buff has no cooldown on how often it can go out. The last readily accessible buff is given in Felwood by picking a Songflower, and it will give you Songflower Serenade, which increases melee, ranged, and spell crit by 5% and all attributes by 15 for 1 hour. Songflower has a 25-minute cooldown before it can be picked again. This is an interesting buff because the buff can only be given out once in its cycle, but also has to be picked, so players will form a circle on it before it comes off cooldown and will just keep clicking on the flower over and over until it's off cooldown and everyone picks at the same time to receive the buff. If you click late, you're out of luck. You're going to have to wait 25 minutes for another clicking opportunity. And sometimes players will go and stand on the Songflower right before you're able to click on it in order to troll players, but sometimes they will literally prevent you from clicking on the flower and cause you to miss the buff, which can be pretty frustrating. And once per month, you also have the Darkmoon Faire, which appears outside of Thunderbluff or Goldshire and offers an assortment of buffs, but the flat 10% damage buff given for damage dealers is by far the most desired, although there are ones for healers that gives you 10% to intellect as well. This buff has a 6-hour cooldown that is unique to the player before it can be received again, and the player needs to remain online for those 6 hours. The timer only runs when you're online, kind of like resurrection sickness. You can't log off and come back in 6 hours and get the buff again. There is so much power in these buffs combined that it almost doubles the output of a lot of performance of melee classes. Wiping with world buffs means an immense power loss to your raid. In most cases, fights are still easily doable, but in some cases, the world buffs can be the difference between success and failure, especially during progression. Now, the downside of buffs. On raid day or the night before, if you want to push your performance, especially against others on Warcraft logs, or to help your guild speed up its raids or face down a new tough boss, then you will head out to get all or some of these buffs. It is quite the dance, and everyone has a different order of getting their buffs. You want to get these buffs as tight together as you possibly can, as they are on a timer and you don't want to waste any of it. And once you have all of your buffs, your character is basically unplayable until your raid. This is known as buff jail, and it actually sucks pretty hard. People generally really love their main character and love playing it, but if every raid day you get in buff jail, it doesn't take long before you start leveling other characters that you might not enjoy as much. It also means that most likely your most powerful character is not available to help you farm. It's crazy that playing your character at its highest level involves so much logging off and not playing your character, especially in the Nax phase of the game where farming consumables or money for consumables is important, and being in buff jail means you are not able to farm. In my world, this means I need to do more GDKPs or maximize my farm time to get the mats, but helping carry people through GDKPs just means more raid days, which means more days in buff jail. Now, on to what I find really awesome about world buffs and the World of Warcraft Classic community. I mentioned earlier that some of these buffs are the result of turning in items that can only be done once per character. Now that means you need an influx of new characters getting these items to turn in for the buff. The other thing is that once some of these buffs have gone out, there is a cooldown until they can be dropped again. Now, with world buffs being very integrated with raiding and players wanting to be able to reliably get these buffs and have it not turn into a battle of guilds trying to drop their buffs whenever is beneficial for them alone, guilds had to come together to do their best to reliably schedule buff drops. On my server, Mancrick, we have Zerathorn, the person who organizes all the world buffs on our server. They track down people who can turn in the buff and ask them to do it at a certain time. A schedule is created to have these buffs going out on cooldown 2 to 4 times per day. It takes a lot of organization to get this done, but the community has really come together to pull this off. It is quite the achievement. Alts are consistently being leveled by players and become part of the buff rotation as they get their quest items. This has been successfully pulled off for months. With the increased size of servers and the attitudes that you find in a lot of gamers, it's pretty impressive that we have managed to get enough people on the same page that servers are able to make this work, and no matter what night your raid nights are on, you are able to get your buffs and push progression. We should see the world buff meta disappear with the coming of the Burning Crusade, as it became obvious that scaling raid difficulty around getting a bunch of world buffs wasn't conducive to player enjoyment. If you designed your boss battles around having the buffs, it was a real struggle to get them, and if you didn't design the bosses around the buffs, then the guilds who were buffed were easily able to defeat said bosses. So in everyone's best interest, these buffs disappeared from the game. I am not going to miss world buffs most of the time, but I tell you that it is a lot of fun to get all these buffs and go really pump. So I would be lying if I said I wasn't going to miss world buffs a little bit. Thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. Let me know what you think of buff jail. How do you deal with world buffs and buff jail? I know there are guilds that don't give a shit about world buffs and some that swear by them. I'm interested to know how you feel. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. Check out my other content below, my Twitch stream and my Patreon. Raid nights are Tuesday and Thursday at 8:30 Eastern to 11:30. Tune in and watch Q-Chews do their best to beat all the bosses. See you later.